Former President Donald Trump was indicted today for trying to overturn his loss to Joe Biden.
We have to win in November, or we're not going to have Pennsylvania. They'll change the name. They're going to change the name of Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvanians have a unique role with democracy and freedom. We have seen Pennsylvanians rise up at the ballot box.
The work of making this world resemble one that you would prefer to live in is a lunch pail job.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Keystone Reckoning podcast. I'm your host, Jesse White, and I have a special guest with me today, Stephen Caruso of the Penn Capital Star. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
So before we jump into it, we have listeners all over the state. I'm going to ask you to give a little plug for your site that you work for and what you do, because I think it's a really good repository and a good source for good capital level reporting that we don't see in a lot of different areas of the state. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Capital Star?
Yeah. So I work for the Pennsylvania Capital Star. We're part of the state's newsroom network. We're about half the states. It's a nonprofit that just sort of plops four reporters down in state capitals and tells them to do their worst. So we've been around since 2019. It's myself, the editor John Mysick, associate editor Cassie Miller, and my coworker Marley Parrish. And we are really, as you said, really focused on the State House specifically. So sometimes we do national coverage. Sometimes we keep an eye on what Bob Casey, Pat Toomey are up to. But my job is I'm the House beat writer. I spend most of my time focusing on just the Pennsylvania House. Your local state reps, talking about Brian Cutler, Kerry Benninghoff, Joanna McClinton, those folks. So, I think we compete with the best of them. I think, I would put our work up against, a lot of the outlets that cover Harrisburg on a day-to-day basis. And, I do appreciate the kind words, though, because it's always nice to hear it from someone else.
No, absolutely. Because and I look at it from two sides. One is from someone who served in the State House. And, we had to always be very cautious about what media outlet you were talking to, right? Are they going to give us the fair shake or not? And, older members of the caucus would just be like, don't talk to reporters. They're snakes. And, but invariably you would, it would happen that you would easily get bitten by someone, because you're dealing with editorial boards and agendas and things like that. So to have this nonprofit that's kind of just calling balls and strikes fairly is a really, I don't think people realize how beneficial it is to have. And also to, now as someone who's on the outside, there's so much that happens kind of not behind the scenes, but, under the dome that, in terms of process and things like that, that is so critical to understanding what's going on. And it could just get lost if there's not anybody there to report on it. So it's really important work. It really is.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I kind of took this job. I mean, I guess I covered state government for a little bit before the Capital Star, but I think my pitch every time I've done an interview is basically that I think state government's the most important form of government and the least covered form of government. So, combine those two things, and I'm very happy to do it. Absolutely.
So, all right, let's talk maps.
Please.
So, yeah, because I'm sure this isn't anything you've talked about recently.
Oh, it's just, I've literally been having dreams about maps. I am embarrassed to admit it, but I have literally had State House maps and conversation about State House maps been popping up in my brain. I don't know if that just means I need a vacation or what.
Yeah, I think or institutionalized, one or the other. So I want to hit this from a couple of different angles. The first way I want to hit it is from a process angle. So for those who aren't, the kind of the lay person out there that doesn't really understand how redistricting works, there are two different kinds of redistricting. The congressional maps are drawn by the State House and signed by the governor. That's some real sausage making right there.
Yeah.
And then the State House and State Senate maps are done by this independent redistricting commission, which is, a member of each of the four caucuses plus this independent fifth person. So I want to talk to me about this fifth person and kind of how you think they influenced the process and what your impressions were.
Yeah, so the fifth person's Mark Nordenberg. Your Western Pennsylvania listeners or any Pitt alums like you might recognize him. He's the former chancellor, good old Nordy. And he was picked by the state Supreme Court because those four caucus leaders couldn't come to an agreement. One part of your description I will just push back on is you said, it's an independent commission, and it kind of is, but, as you said, like the membership is legislative leaders. So a lot of times, like there is sausage making in it. It's just like, it's not as, I know it's like it's a bit different because instead of those leaders having to go and get the votes of their members on a floor vote like the congressional bill, they can just go behind closed doors and negotiate a map. So that's kind of what happened this time. Is like Mark Nordenberg laid this all out in the meeting where they approved the maps, which is like an insane amount of detail that I wish more people did when describing the legislative process. Like Nordenberg,
it was impressive.
Yeah. Like Nordenberg. So what Nordenberg's role is supposed to be, like what the chairman of this commission is supposed to do, is like the way it's been described is like sort of they call balls and strikes. I think Nordenberg pushed back on that in the meeting, but like the ideal of this commission, at least in previous processes, is like the caucus leaders just meet, hash out their maps. They like kind of draw where it's not competitive at all, because like what does a Democrat care how Tioga County looks like? What does a Republican care how wards in Philadelphia look like on a state house level? And then when they have to have a competitive district, when they have lines that will influence who wins, who loses, they then, fight amongst each other, see if they can work out a compromise. And if they can't, they go to the chairman, and the chairman will sort of just like make a call. And that is what Nordenberg is supposed to be doing. Nordenberg, though, I kind of came into the process, like, I wouldn't say promising to be more active, but he seemed to come into it. Like, we've sometimes had just retired judges. We've had people who are late to the political process come in. Like the last time it was a retired judge from Delaware County. This time,
as a sitting member, it was a disaster.
And that is what is a lot of people have described that. I know it's particularly advocates, I'm sure Republicans looking at their responses to this map. Anyway, look, the main thing could be said is, and Nordenberg, though, came in, like, I think clear with this idea that I'm taking this seriously. I want to draw fair maps. I want to improve these maps that have been decried for at least the last decade. And the maps, I guess you're a former state house member, like, because the map making has always been a political process. I mean, it's pretty easy. There's a lot of types of gerrymandering that have been baked into these maps. We're talking partisan gerrymandering, racial gerrymandering, incumbent protection gerrymandering, and screw over members of the caucus. I don't like gerrymandering. Like, yes. There's all of these have been done, and once those maps are altered for those reasons, those changes kind of stay because people get elected to those districts, and then you have somebody in that district. It becomes hard to change the district because then people get mad, which we'll get to in a moment. But I'm worried this is a very long answer, but just to say, like, Nordenberg came in with all this in his mind, and I think that's shown in the final product because as he described it, like, sort of in the Senate, we saw this, like, the classic sort of map making, as I described it, where Nordenberg's just kind of sitting there taking suggestions from caucus leaders, making a call when he has to or not. But mostly that was a negotiated product, according to Nordenberg. That was Jay Costa and Kim Ward sitting down, the Senate Democratic and Republican leader, and just saying, this is a map we're comfortable with. The only person who's really screwed by that map is John Udechak, who's an independent.
Who's done a fair share of screwing in the chamber himself, switching parties. So.
Yeah, and also and Senator Jake Corman, who is president of the chamber, but has said he's running for governor. So, like, the only people who are really, like, who are completely drawn out of their district, forced into a really tough circumstance. There might be another exception to that, but main point is, like, very few people are, like, I think, severely harmed by that map in the caucus. Now, the House map, according to Nordenberg, Joanna McClinton, Democratic leader, Carrie Benninghoff, Republican leader, just did not meet. Carrie said after the meeting that, like, they had one scheduled meeting, then he had COVID. I remember that diagnosis, and then that meeting got canceled, and he was never able to reschedule. So basically, they just did not meet to talk about the maps, to do that horse trade that the Senate did to try and be like, well, what if we shore up this guy, protect that guy, and do the other thing? So Nordenberg said that, like, he kind of had to make a map map by taking ideas from both sides. And then he had his own mapper. His name's Jonathan Service. He was a CMU, I believe, graduate studies, and he's done this mapping before. It's called a special master. So, and they had to develop this product. And when you look at the house map, that's where you see, like, that's where a lot of the controversy is, because that house map that Nordenberg put out there really like upsets the apple cart. There are going to be 14 Republican incumbents that have to face each other, or 12 Republican incumbents that have to face each other in 2022 in the primary if this map is implemented. And it was just a preliminary vote. So let's just say, like, and Republicans have quickly now tried to call Nordenberg biased. I think that a lot of there's a lot to go through with these maps. I think Nordenberg had a good reputation coming in. No one raised red flags about Nordenberg's background. You can find a mix, like a trans-partisan sort of like mix there. Like, he's donated to Joe Biden. He donated to Dick Thornburg. He worked on transition teams for Tom Corbett and Tom Wolf. Like, he's just sort of, the way he described himself was, I'm just, I am a open-minded, nonpartisan person who's worked with both parties over the years when asked. And, that was the beginning of the process, something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. And that was what people basically, until this map came out, had kind of described him. We're starting to see some pushback. There was a Fox News article that highlighted these donations that he's made. It's like 2. And I as someone who covered the whole process, I'd be skeptical of those attacks. But when you get into the details of the map, I think it's just going to depend on how you look at and what you value, which is going to lead to what your takeaway of the map is. I hope that's answers your question.
It really does. And, the thing is, in comparing this to the process from 10 years ago, when you talk about the different kinds of gerrymandering, you really did kind of hit the entire checklist. And, I was, the one thing that, I want people listening to this to understand is that, it is done by legislative leaders, but rank and file members, by and large, are pretty much kept in the dark. Mm-hmm. We have there'd be a few things, and this is also from talking to current members, the same kind of thing. I know Matt Bradford, the House of Perps chair, was kind of the point man for the caucus on the House Dem side. And, so everybody is, sitting in their office doing Dave's redistricting app, trying to come up with their, the versions that work the best, and, doing a little horse trading with their neighbors. Well, if I did this and you did that, because what people don't realize is this is basically like a big blanket. You pull on one thread, it impacts threads all over the place. You can't just start, there's very little room for deviation. So, what happens is the rank and file lawmakers, by and large, are just as in the dark as everybody else. I mean, I was sitting in my office when Mike Turzai got on the rostrum and said that a district of Washington County was being eliminated. And I was like, oh my God, that's me. Like, it took me like a couple of minutes. I was like, oh, damn. And like, I ran up to the floor because, but the thing was, and this is where I think the difference between last time and this time is, last time the maps were determined to be so ridiculous that they were thrown out. We actually ran under the old maps for one more cycle. And then there were new maps. Do you foresee anything like that happening here?
I think these maps are going to be litigated. These maps are going, like Nordenberg has said that, pretty much, like he expects it. And they are a draft. They could change more. I guess all I'm really comfortable. Like, in some ways, I almost hate to go into specifics of these maps because they're, I in my mind, with the congressional maps, with these maps, there's a high likelihood that what we're seeing right now may not be the final product, and it could be small tweaks. It could be big changes. So, like, specifics, I almost find like. I guess I'm like skeptical from my position of getting into. I think that. So overall, I'm definitely happy to, and like I imagine, and Nordenberg seemed confident that what they have done with these maps, which specifically tried to like increase minority representation, would hold up in court. That's kind of one of the, I think, guide stars of like why Nordenberg made the choices he made, was like he wanted to see increased he wanted more majority minority districts, or it's called minority opportunity districts, which is where basically it's like either one minority group does not make up a majority. So like imagine a district, that's like 30% black, 30% Latino. So no Black voters and Latino voters don't make up a majority, but if they vote together, that there are more non-white voters than there are white voters. This is in like legal terms kind of referred to as an opportunity district. Also, I've heard the terms referred to as like, or that might be a coalition district. Then there's also districts that like are maybe 37 to 45% minority. So they're still majority white, but like, if it's a heavily Democratic district, most of the Democratic voters in that district are probably non-white. So then in the primary, they're probably able to pick their candidate, and that candidate is most likely to win the general. Like, I go into this is all complicated, and these are some of the conversations I'm having that I'm trying to like turn into a story in the coming days. But I only bring this all up because like understanding that and understanding that thought process for Nordenberg, I think, is essential to understanding some of these map stranger choices that are where a lot of the controversy comes from. And I also think it's those very choices that I wonder it might be litigated.
See, you're right. And it sounded to me like when he was giving his explanation, it almost sounded to me like it was almost verbatim what you're going to hear in a legal argument. Right. Like, I mean, I think that knowing the history of how this went and knowing that, you know, in our politics today, you know, we're as litigious as ever, if not more, and knowing the stakes involved, you know, for the caucuses, I think he went into this knowing that, you know, you're going to get legal challenges. You know, one way. Yeah. It's the nature of the job. Right.
Yeah. I mean, look at his chief of staff or chief counsel, Rob Beyer. He's a former Republican, I believe, Commonwealth Court justice. You know, yes. Like, I feel like, honestly, I haven't emphasized that enough in some of my stories. Like, I put aside even the party affiliation, like having a former like appeals court justice who would have probably heard a lot of these arguments on your side as you're trying to analyze this, I think is important in Nuremberg. I mean, Nuremberg was before he became Chancellor Pitt, he was the head of the Pitt's law school. You know, like he comes from a scholarly legal background. I'd also I think about how, you know, you mentioned like what Nuremberg has been like. One other public decision we had to see him make was on the a prison gerrymandering, on where should people in prison count when drawing these maps. They have traditionally been counted in their cells. If you are in prison, you are counted as existing for census purposes, redistricting purposes, where that jail is. So what that does is effectively move. I think the state prison population is something in the 40,000 range. It goes up and down. It's definitely lower these days. But that effectively moves people. This is studies. This isn't talking from stereotype. It effectively moves a lot of representation from cities to the rural places where prisons are built. And on that, so it became a priority for liberal advocacy groups, criminal justice advocacy groups, and Joanna McClinton. She was onto this before she was minority leader. That there should that should not happen. That reallocation of prisoners should not happen. They should be counted where they are going to return once their term ends, or once their time ends. And Nordenberg kind of went to that meeting and he just kind of started talking about precedent and legality. And a lot of people do, especially on weighty decisions, but his was even more like citing old precedent and all the case law and everything we could find. And he kind of concluded that his conclusion on why he ended up saying we're going to move prisoners back to where they come from rather than count them in Fayette County, in Somerset County, in Schuylkill County, was I cannot see any legal reason why this, I cannot see a legal reason we have to do either. And I think it is illegally defensible to do it. And I think it sounds like the right decision, and there is precedent from other states, so we should do it. So yeah, precedent, I think, is very big in how Nuremberg thinks.
Right. Yeah. Everything about it just said to me, bring the challenges. We feel comfortable that we're going to be able to beat them back in a reasonable way. And, one of the things that I think that a lot of people don't realize is you kind of touched on it, are the criteria by which maps can be thrown out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I'm an incumbent and I don't want to run against another incumbent. That's not really a reason. The ideas are to make sure that there is minority representation, to make sure population deviations are respected, minimize county and municipal splits, those sorts of things. And I think from that point of view, I think these maps check most of the boxes.
Well, some of them. I mean, I think there are some big concerns with the population deviation. It's quite high on these maps. It's under the 10% threshold, but not by a lot. So, like, that's something that I think, they might have to keep an eye on. That I would say, and I am very interested by what, like, the one precedent that I am very interested to see is, like, so these maps, especially the House maps. When I talk, I'm talking a lot about the House maps. There's conversation I had about the Senate, but the House to me is, like, the most fascinating, and that's not just because of my beat, but, like, the city of Harrisburg is split, the city of Lancaster is split. Reading was split twice, and I think it would have to be, but it's split 3 times under these maps. Scranton was split, I think, 4 ways. I actually have not looked at NEPA enough. Sorry to any NEPA residents listening to this. And overall, like, those splits, I am. Nordenberg, I asked him specifically about them, and Nordenberg said he thought they were justified specifically because most of those splits were done to increase minority representation. I don't know of any, like, I asked one expert who said he was not aware of any Pennsylvania specific, like, constitution, state statute, or, like, even, like, federally mandated VRA protections in Pennsylvania that, like, need to be there. So, like, there's not a lot of case law on that. And, like, also, like, how those splits will comport with the, the 2018 gerrymandering ruling. I feel like I am not a lawyer, but from my conversations, I do feel comfortable saying, like, I think these are all really open questions. And as you said, though, like, Nordenberg seemed very confident. So, like, but I think there could be questions coming from a lot of sides, definitely Republicans, but I could see some Democratic groups or liberal groups or just, like, community groups that potentially might not like the way their town has been divided, their municipality has been divided, their community has been divided. Because of these maps too. So I don't know. It to me seems like a huge open question.
Absolutely. And so it was interesting because we're talking about the response to this, like this was some, like, clear Democratic gerrymander. Mm-hmm. And the way I've looked at it is, when you've got the last couple of cycles where there was a clear Republican gerrymander, mm-hmm. Just because it's not what they want it to be, it's not what the Republicans want it to be, doesn't mean that it's corrupt. It means, to me, it's like water returning to the level. Mm-hmm. That these are more fair. And yeah, you're not going to like it because you're losing a big chunk of the advantage that you've had baked into the last 20 years. That of it does not make them unconstitutional and these sorts of things. And I'm not going to ask you to comment on that.
Yeah.
To make a call on that. But my question is, so Nordenberg, when he was doing his analysis, made it a point to say that these maps still favored the GOP. Mm-hmm. Both sets, but on the House maps. What exactly did he mean? Like, how exactly does he justify that?
So how he meant that is it has to do with it's funny. It goes back to Dave's redistricting app, DRA becoming the MVP of this redistricting cycle. And it's funny because both sides are using DRA to justify why they say what they say. If you look at DRA and you look at these maps, there is, I believe, like a 1-seat advantage for Biden in how the maps were drawn. So Republican. And then if you also go to just like the composite, which is like just DRA's way of saying, like, if you look at all of the statewide election results that we can get our hands on from 2016 to 2020 and mash them together and like say what they kind of represent, what the average of them is for these districts, there is a slight Democratic advantage on these maps by that composite. But at the same, like in total districts that are Democratic leaning, and that lean can go from, like maybe like 0.5% less to, 30-40% if you're talking like Center City, Philly, maybe more than that. But what what's been pointed out to me too, though, is that like that composite runs on the idea that the statewide election result was 51-46 in like a 51-46 Democratic win, because Democrats have won all but 3 statewide races in Pennsylvania. I don't know about state Supreme Court, but I don't think DRA uses them. Anyway, like, the point is Democrats have won a lot of statewide races in Pennsylvania since 2016. So their like composite already favors Democrats, and Democrats win a like slim majority of seats under those conditions. So how it's been put to me is that like if you imagine a 50-50 election where like the statewide vote for Democrats and Republicans is equal, or like maybe +1 vote because somebody has to win, Republicans will still in that scenario have a majority, like pick up a majority of seats under this map. So
because of geography.
Yes, and it has because of geography, because of the way I always think about it is that like the best performing Democratic district in Pennsylvania is like literally like 95% Democratic, 5% Republican in parts of Philly. The best performing Republican districts are maybe 80-20. Like 80% Republican, 20% Democratic. Democrats are just so much more packed, and we can talk about a lot of reasons. I mean, we're going to have to go into housing discrimination. I mean, there's always racism. We're talking about America, and like we could talk about like just sorting. But like the fact is, how that ends is Democrats are more packed. So unless you draw a map that's a bunch of spaghetti strands, you're going to kind of end up with this like geography just sort of determining that Democrats are at a slight disadvantage.
Right. So yeah, it's one of those things where you could, so that allows you to kind of gives you the freedom to make an argument either way, right? Well, it should be more Democratic, it should be less Democratic, it should be whatever.
And if I may, no, it's fine. Like the only other thing I'd bring up too is that the one thing I feel really confident on saying with this map too is it's weird on a, like, if you look at,
I think that should just be it. It's weird.
Yeah, no. So like I even need to pick my words like carefully. Like, so it is both a more competitive and less competitive map. By that, I mean the actual outcome in the General Assembly, like when you look at the body as a whole, it will make the margins tighter. There are more lean D districts. They increase by about 15, 16. Like districts Democrats are pretty much guaranteed to win. And then and Republicans gained like 1 or 2 seats by that metric. And it does that by reducing the number of competitive districts. So the actual outcome, like the General Assembly will likely be even tighter between Republicans and Democrats. And it's no guarantee that Democrats have the advantage, but like there likely just be a slimmer margin between the two sides. And it does that by reducing the number of actually competitive, like singularly competitive districts, like districts that are on a knife edge, like swing districts, I guess is the way to put it. Mm-hmm. Like, and you can look at, and you can look at that by like, a big example of that to me is, I live in Harrisburg. You live in the West Shore, right?
Yeah, I'm in Cumberland County.
Yeah. So, you look at the way Harrisburg was divided, like a lot of the Democratic gains come from the fact that like Democrats right now just have like one person from State College, one person from Harrisburg, one person from York, one person from Lancaster. Under this map, there would be 2 Democrats, there'd be like one good Democratic seat and one like lean, if not like, I mean, look, I'm not a handicapper, but like one pretty good seat for Democrats in State College. So like they could particularly pick up a seat there. It would go from 1 to 3 pretty solid Democratic seats in Harrisburg. It would go, and they'd still have 1 seat in York, but in Lancaster, there'd be 2 pretty solid Democratic seats and 1 that's like swingy. So like, this is just to say like these cities where, depending on how you draw it, maybe you just get more competitive districts. Nordenberg, also with the idea of more minority representation, has just drawn these like pretty solidly Democratic seats, and that where there used to just be 1. So I guess this is just all to say that like, that is, I think, also where some of the controversy comes from, is I've had 1 or 2 Republicans complain to me, too, that their concern is also just the lack of competitive districts, the decline in competitive districts. I ran the numbers, but I'm pretty sure, like, if just going by, like, how DRA defines a district as competitive, which, we could probably quibble over, but it goes from like 45 competitive seats to like 28 competitive seats. I'd have to double check my numbers. I shouldn't have used an exact number, but it was a rather significant decline. I hope that makes sense.
Tune in to the next episode of the Keystone Reckoning podcast for part 2 of our interview with Stephen Caruso from the Penn Capital Star as we continue our deep dive into legislative redistricting. Thank you again for listening. Please, for more information, visit KeystoneReckoning.com.